Shipbuilding. The first and, for more than a century, the largest naval dockyard in the Ottoman Empire was at Gallipoli. It was here at the end of the 14th century that Bayezid I built and repaired his fleet and, if we are to believe the report of the Aragonese ambassador to Timur, who saw the ships in 1402, had a capacity for about 40 galleys. 16 It is quite probable that, already at this time, the captains and crews of the ships were permanent residents of the town. This was certainly the case by 1474, when their salaries appear in the first surviving register of government expenditure in Gallipoli. In this year there were 92 detachments of these seamen, each with a captain at its head, 17 with each detachment perhaps representing the crew of a single galley. This figure evidently remained constant until 1518, when there were 93 detachments. 18 is a yard for the construction of ships. However, Gallipoli seems to have expanded after 1518. In 1522, the year of the conquest of Rhodes, a Venetian bailo reported that more slipways were under construction. By 1530, there were 30, with further extensions in 1530 and 1565. 6.19. The document of 1518 also records expenditure on the craftsmen who built and repaired the ships. These, it shows, fell into different categories. First, there were 8 small groups of men who specialized in shipbuilding crafts: storekeepers, oarmakers, caulkers, pulley makers and oakum workers, or in the maintenance and use of weapons, armorers, gunners and bombardiers. In all, these numbered only 81 men, the caulkers with 26 and the gunners with 28, forming the biggest group. The large number of caulkers suggests that their major task was the maintenance rather than the construction of ships. The numbers went up slightly in subsequent years, reaching 127 in 1530, but were never great. The records show that many of these men were novice janissaries, serving craft apprenticeships before enrollment in the Janissary Corps. The most numerous group of craftsmen, however, were temporary employees whom the arsenal hired, presumably from the neighboring coastal districts, when work was in hand, and dismissed on its completion. For the unskilled but heavy tasks, such as dragging ships onto the land, the footmen and exemptees in the district of Gallipoli provided the labor. 20. The Naval Arsenal in Istanbul had a similar organization. When Mehmed II conquered the Genoese town of Pera in 1453, he acquired with it the Genoese Old Arsenal, with its docks and slipways on the shore of the Golden Horn. He evidently expanded it during his reign, as he undertook the construction of large war fleets. It was not, however, until the 16th century that it surpassed Gallipoli as the main center for shipbuilding and maintenance. Selim I, 1512-20, according to the report of Lutfi Pasha, planned to construct 300 docks that would have stretched the entire length of the Golden Horn, 21, but he never completed the work. Nonetheless, by 1522, there were 114 docks, by 1557, 123, and this number seems to have remained steady until the mid-17th century. In 1653, there were about 120.22. Each dock had 2 covered slipways, where it was possible to build or house galleys, giving the arsenal a capacity to construct or maintain about 250 galleys at one time. Between 1546 and 1549, the Admiral, Sokollu Mehmed, built a warehouse behind each dock, and walled off the entire area. 23. As at Gallipoli, there were permanent and temporary craftsmen. The permanent employees in the Istanbul arsenal were again novices, forming groups of caulkers, carpenters, oarmakers, bombardiers, blacksmiths, repairers, pulley block makers and oakum workers. Their numbers were small, with the caulkers, 40 men in 1530, making up the largest group of a total of 90 craftsmen. Most of the craftsmen, however, came from outside. They were mostly, according to a Venetian account, Greek shipwrights from Istanbul, Galata and the nearby islands, but when work was urgent, they would come from as far afield as Lesbos or Chios. The master shipwrights remain largely anonymous. In 1553, the Venetian bailo mentioned a Greek master, whom he calls Michel Benedetto, with 3 or 4 master shipwrights under his command. In 1562, another bailo reported that there were Venetian shipwrights working in the arsenal, who had greatly improved the standard of shipbuilding. Beyond this, there is no information. It was again the footmen and exemptees who carried out heavy tasks in the arsenal, serving terms of 6 months. 24. By the early 17th century, the organization of the craftsmen seems to have changed. There were far more permanent craftsmen, 838 in 1604, representing a wider range of crafts, including oarmakers and bronze casters, and recruitment was no longer exclusively, or even mainly, from the novices. Their total numbers, however, declined during the century, so that, by 1648, at the time of the Cretan War, there were only 368.25. It seems probable, therefore, that, in order to save money, the government went back to the practice of hiring the bulk of the labor force when the need arose. The number of permanent employees seems, however, to have been much higher. Then during the first part of the 16th century, Gallipoli and Istanbul were not the only shipbuilding sites in the empire. There were permanent installations at Izmit to the east of the capital, at Sinop on the Black Sea, at Suez in the Red Sea and, while during the 16th century, at Basra in southern Iraq. 26 to build a galley hull, however, did not require a special dockyard and, in years when need was pressing, as in 1571-2 after the loss of 2/3 of the fleet at the Battle of Lepanto, the government would order the construction of extra ships at specified points on the shores of the Black Sea and Mediterranean, and the impressment of craftsmen to do the work. The winter of 1571-2 saw the completion of more than 100 vessels outside Istanbul and Gallipoli. 27 The completed hulls had to go to the main arsenals only to receive their fittings and artillery. Of all the Mediterranean powers, the Ottoman Empire possessed the most abundant resources for shipbuilding. Timber, in particular, was available from the dense woodlands of northwestern Anatolia, near to the arsenals at Istanbul, Gallipoli, and Izmit, and from the forested slopes of the mountains along the southern shore of the Black Sea. The supply was the envy of foreign observers in the 16th and 17th centuries, and did not show signs of exhaustion until the late 17th and 18th centuries. Today, the area is largely treeless. Already in the 16th century, and probably earlier, the government had reserved tracts of forest for ships' timbers, appointing guards to protect the trees. The inhabitants of specified villages in these areas felled the timbers and cut them into shape, receiving a wage from the treasury for their work. Since the forests were close to the sea, the next stage was to haul the timbers overland to the nearest port, and to transport them by ship to the arsenals. It seems that judges and officials specially appointed when work was in hand oversaw the operation. 28 In the 17th century, the same system continued, with some refinements. For the Istanbul arsenal, the commissioner for timber determined the amount of wood required from each area, and the specified number of villagers who would carry out the work. These, in turn, received their wages in the judge's court from the agent of the commissioner. The treasury, however, met only 1/5 of the costs, the rest coming from extraordinary taxes levied in the timber-producing districts. The arsenals could, when required, buy extra timber from merchants, but, since the reserve timber was considerably cheaper, the wages and transport costs being below market rates, they clearly preferred not to do so. 29. There was a similar continuity between the 16th and 17th centuries in the procurement of other materials. In the 16th century, the main areas for the supply of cloth for the sails and awnings of galleys were Gallipoli, southern Greece, especially Athens, Lavadia and Evora, and the Aegean region of Anatolia. Although cloth could, as in 1560, come from as far away as Egypt and Aleppo, the organization of the work had some resemblance to timber felling, with the local judge or a commissioner from Istanbul allocating the work between villages and overseeing production. Again, it was the weavers who had the responsibility for cutting and packing the finished cloth, before dispatching it overland, or by sea, to the arsenals. In most cases, local revenues covered the costs of production and transport. 30 In the 17th century, the same system of production continued, in the same areas, although Gallipoli seems to have emerged as the most important supplier, especially of awnings. Consignments of sails and awnings from Egypt also became more regular. It was probably during the 17th century, too, that the system began of specifying exactly how much cloth each household was to produce, and of allocating specific parcels of local revenues to pay for production. 31. The rigging and ropes for the fleet came from the areas of hemp production. In the 16th century, these were the Black Sea coasts of Anatolia to the west of Samsun, and the Bulgarian coastlands, with small amounts coming from Tyre, inland from Izmir. Of these, Samsun was the most important. In 1539, the Istanbul arsenal bought 156 tons from this area, as against about 20 tons from Bulgaria. 32 In the 17th century, Samsun became, if anything, even more important as a supplier of rope. In 1656, Khatib Chelebi reported that each year the region produced 395 tons of hemp for use by the fleet. 33 The hemp was, as a rule, spun into rope in the area of production before dispatch. In both the 16th and 17th centuries, it was, above all, the mines and foundries of Samokov in Bulgaria that provided the nails, anchors and iron parts for the galleys. These usually came to the shipbuilding sites ready-made. The cost of transport was, however, enormous. In 1606-7, for example, the Istanbul Arsenal purchased 162,000 nails from Samokov for 198,608 akshas. The cost of transport from Samokov to the port of Tekirdağ on the Sea of Marmara, and from there to Istanbul, was 188,014 akshas, with additional costs of 29,451 akshas to pay the wages of 2 clerks, a weighbridge clerk, and a master blacksmith. 34. The ship's hulls, when complete, required pitch and oakum for caulking, and tallow or other grease for oiling below the waterline. There was an abundant supply of pitch from various parts of the empire: Vlora in Albania, Pazarjik in Bulgaria, Mytilene, Thassos, and the coasts of the northwestern Aegean, and from near Samsun, on the Black Sea. 35 These areas continued to supply the arsenals in the 17th century, when the government designated revenues from Durrës and Pec to pay for 115 tons each year from Vlora, and the customs revenues of Mytilene to pay for an annual 17 or so tons from Lesbos. 36 These figures suggest that, as in the 16th century, Vlora continued to be the most important source of supply. The oakum for caulking was available cheaply from throughout the empire, the major cost being for the transport rather than for the substance itself. The next process after caulking was to oil the hull, and this required tallow in huge quantities. To oil a galley required, according to Khatib Chelebi, about 350 kilograms of tallow, and it was necessary to carry out the operation 3 times a year, once before leaving the arsenal, and twice during the campaign. 37 Tallow also supplied the material for shipboard candles and for soap, especially necessary for the caulkers. The abundance of animals in the empire seems, however, to have ensured that it was never in short supply, with consignments in the 16th and 17th centuries coming mainly, it appears, from Rumelia, Wallachia, and Moldavia. 38. Once a galley was complete, it received its cannon and its crew.